Good morning, 7th grade. I told you we're going to be working on some stuff having to do with our current pandemic, and I want to give you a quick explanation of why we're doing that. So, obviously it's current, but as I mentioned in the welcome video for this morning, it also has to do with that these kind of events shape history. And I have seen through my social media some posts from some educated people where they're saying, nothing like this has ever happened before, and it's just really not true. It hasn't happened to us or in our lifetime necessarily. It's not something that we're used to dealing with, and that's very true. But these kinds of things do happen throughout history. So it's something that I wanted you to understand and to get an idea of why it's so important to know about these things and to understand how they can shape history going forward. So I'm not really going to have to post a lot of videos specifically for you this week. I think what I've given you to do is much more self-explanatory than in the past 2 weeks. So I'm not going to have to really go step by step with you. Really, you're just going to be watching a couple of YouTube videos. I think I got some feedback that the third one is no longer working, so I will provide something else instead of that. So we'll get to that. But you're just going to watch the YouTube videos, make some bullet pointed notes, so just jot down a few things, and then you have a Venn diagram that I want you to complete. And you can either print out the one that's in the PDF or you can make one of your own, but it's a 3-circle Venn diagram. So you are going to be comparing and contrasting all 3 of the events. So one is the current COVID-19 coronavirus, one is the influenza of 1918, yes. So about 100 years ago, there was a major flu pandemic. And it's also known as the Spanish flu because it, not because it originated in Spain, but because Spain did not cover up any of the information that they had about the flu. So the death toll and the amount of people who were sick, they published that information where other governments like our own covered it up. And because of that, they ended up with a lot more deaths because people, not only did they not know how to prevent, so they didn't do things like hand washing, etc., but they actually went to big public events. Like there was a parade, and then a whole bunch of people who went to the parade ended up getting sick. So it explains part of why we are dealing with the social distancing things right now, because in the past, those precautions were not known or were not taken, and it ended up creating a much bigger issue. Also, in the case of that, it was just after World War I, and so they wanted, well, it was towards the end of it. It started in the spring, just like our current thing, and then seemed to kind of die down over the summer, but then came back in the fall. And part of the reason why the government, our government specifically, was covering up the how serious of an issue it was, has to do with that we were involved in this conflict. And so they ended up sending a lot of young men to war who were actually sick, and that got a whole bunch of other young men sick. And in the case of the current situation, it seems like young people are not as susceptible. However, in that case, it was really affecting young people, and a lot of people who were in their teens and 20s were the people who were dying. So we ended up losing a lot more soldiers actually to disease than in the war itself. So really big concern there. So you're going to have a video about that one. And then I also gave you a video about yellow fever, which most people haven't even heard of that. I mean, you guys have heard of the flu at least, but yellow fever is one that people haven't really heard about. I'm aware of it because I'm a nerd, so I read this book a few years ago, The American Plague, which is this whole fat book, is all about yellow fever. And it's similar to, let's see, malaria. You've heard of that probably. So you get it from mosquitoes. It's carried by mosquitoes. It is not currently a problem, but it was a huge issue. Again, it killed a whole bunch of soldiers, more than died, and it was the Spanish-American War. So we're talking end of the 1800s, just early 1900s. And so it was a big, big deal because they had no idea how people were even getting it. So that's one of the things that I want you to be paying attention to in that compare and contrast, is how these things are transmitted, because that's a really big deal. It has to do with how are we going to address taking care of people, how are we going to make sure that we protect people. We want to protect the people who are providing the care. We want to minimize our spread. So in this case, they didn't know, and it ended up that it is vector-borne, but they didn't understand that at the time. So the whole book is talking about that, and I'm not going to recommend you read it because A, it's long, B, most of you would find it super boring, and C, it gives some pretty graphic descriptions of how it affected people and how they died. But to give you an idea of how that is continuing to affect us, the World Health Organization, who has given us some of our guidelines to be following right now, considers even one case of yellow fever to be an epidemic. So if there's even one case, it spreads so quickly and is so devastating that they actually consider that an epidemic and will start treating it as such immediately. So kind of a big deal. Because of the research of quite a few military doctors, because it was, as I said, killed a lot of soldiers, they did find out that was vector-borne, and were actually able to come up with not a cure, but they know how to treat it at least, but you can get a shot for it. You can't. I can't. That's not really a thing. They don't make enough of it, but you can get vaccinated for it because it's a virus. And yeah, but they only make about 500 doses annually, and they reserve that in case there is an epidemic. It's part of the treatment plan for if that happens. So who knows how we're going to go forward with the current situation, what that's going to look like in the future. But when you have that many people who are dying from disease, obviously it could affect the war. And, it kind of did in some of those cases because, you don't have as many people. So it's something that happens over and over throughout history. I know that many of you have talked about when we were back in November, you talked about the introduction of diseases such as smallpox into the Americas and how that changed dynamics here. People didn't, the Native Americans didn't have the numbers that they had before because they were decimated by that. So disease is something that not only affects us immediately like that, but then it changed who was in control of the area. It can have political effects. It can have military effects. So I want you to keep in mind those kinds of things as you're filling out your Venn diagram. Think about that. And if you want to look into those things more, feel free. I definitely encourage you, watch the videos. Don't do the reading if you don't have to. Okay? I had to provide materials for you to use if you don't have good internet access, and I think I was able to find some quality stuff, but it's going to be a little bit tedious, and to get across the same amount of content that you can get in just a few minutes of YouTube video, they're kind of lengthy. So watch the videos, fill out your stuff, and then I think the game that I gave you to use may not be easily available, so we'll get to that. later in the week if that's a challenge for some people. It should be free in the Google Play Store because I was looking at what's available through our usual medium of the Chromebooks and stuff, but it may not be free or available to you, and so we'll have to look at some different options as far as fulfilling what I asked you to do with that. But we'll get to that, so provide me some feedback. I would appreciate. Also, I heard from a student that they were having trouble getting into the Google Classroom, so I'm going to double check the code on that and make sure that I provide you the proper stuff so that we can get on there and have a good discussion about the stuff that we are investigating this week. All right, I will catch up with you guys later, probably tomorrow. Watch those videos and we're going to discuss.